Meera Khurana was the elegant wife of a real estate tycoon. Armaan Sheikh was a 19-year-old village boy hired to drive her around, but what began as a secret affair behind closed car doors ended with a body on the floor and a murder that stunned the city's elite. In the upscale neighborhood of Khorgaon Park in Pune, India, Meera Khurana lived a life many envied from afar. Her home, a sprawling white villa tucked behind manicured hedges and tall iron gates, symbolized the kind of luxury that was out of reach for most. Marble floors, chandeliers imported from Italy, live-in staff, and a fleet of luxury cars parked in the driveway were just part of her everyday reality. Married to Rajeev Khurana, a successful and politically connected real estate tycoon, Meera had spent over 20 years in the role of the perfect housewife. She hosted fundraisers, attended three social gatherings, and managed her home with the precision of a CEO. Everything appeared flawless from the outside, but appearances often lie. At 42, Meera's world had grown quiet. Her 2 children were away in London and Singapore, both pursuing higher studies. Her husband, once attentive and affectionate, now spent most of his time flying between cities or behind the closed doors of his home office. Their conversations had become limited to brief updates about house renovations, dinner parties, and occasional reminders about their children's school fees or birthdays. Meera's days blurred together: yoga at 7 a.m., a protein smoothie, hours scrolling through Instagram, maybe lunch with a friend, then long evenings spent alone in the patio garden with a glass of white wine. Her loneliness wasn't loud, but it was constant, the kind that creeps in slowly, like a shadow that never quite leaves. It wasn't about lacking things, it was the lack of feeling needed, of being seen. Everyone around her assumed she was happy because she had everything, but the truth was, she felt like an afterthought in her own life. In late March, one of the house drivers had to return to his village due to a family emergency. A replacement was hired through an agency, a 19-year-old named Armaan Sheikh. He arrived with few belongings, polite manners, and an eagerness to please. Meera barely noticed him at first. He was just another staff member, quietly opening car doors, wiping the bonnet clean, and driving her to the salon or the club without saying a word unless spoken to. But slowly, the routine began to shift. Meera found herself asking him to take longer routes. She asked about his village, his family, his dreams. He answered shyly but respectfully, and unlike the polished, scripted conversations of her social circle, Armaan's words felt raw and sincere. He listened without judgment, laughed when she told silly stories, and never looked at his phone when she spoke. Meera started requesting that only he drive her, subtly instructing the house manager to assign other staff elsewhere. At first it was innocent, or at least that's what she told herself, but something in her began to wake up, something that had been dormant for years. She noticed the way he glanced at her in the rear-view mirror. She began putting more effort into her appearance. Lipstick in shades she hadn't worn since her 30s, extra perfume, jewelry that had been collecting dust in velvet boxes. Without realizing it, Meera's life was starting to shift in a dangerous direction, one that would soon leave a trail of destruction behind. The shift in Meera's routine became increasingly apparent to those around her, though no one dared to question it. What began as casual interest soon grew into a quiet obsession. Meera now insisted on being driven even to the shortest errands, ones she would previously walk or ignore entirely. Whether it was a last-minute trip to the florist or an unplanned stop at a cafe, Armaan was always behind the wheel. His youthful charm and quiet presence had taken hold of her mind. He was the only person who gave her his undivided attention, who made her feel seen without expecting anything in return. That feeling was addictive. Armaan, for his part, seemed caught between awe and confusion. He came from a modest background, the son of a small-time mechanic from Satara. This job was the best opportunity he'd ever had, and he didn't want to risk it. At first, he kept things strictly professional, but Meera's gestures began to blur that line. She started giving him small gifts, snacks from gourmet shops, a second-hand watch, a pair of branded sunglasses. Then she surprised him with a smartphone, claiming it was an extra one lying around unused. Armaan was hesitant, but accepted it out of gratitude, unaware of the deeper intentions behind the kindness. Over the next few weeks, their dynamic shifted. They stopped at quiet roadside tea stalls on the outskirts of Pune, where no one knew her. She laughed more freely in his presence, told him things she never shared with friends about her dreams before marriage, the loneliness of an empty house, the feeling of being invisible in her own life. Armaan listened, unsure of how to respond, but he kept showing up, driving her without complaint, keeping her secrets without asking for anything. By May, Meera had created an entire emotional world around him. She opened a secondary bank account under a false name and began transferring money amounts small enough not to attract attention, but frequent enough to matter. She told herself she was helping him, giving him a future, perhaps buying back a piece of her lost youth. Her behavior at home began to change. She was more distant with Rajeev, dismissive with staff, impatient with the smallest delays. Her mood rose and fell based on whether Armaan was on duty. The house staff began noticing odd patterns. Meera would ask for Armaan late at night, sometimes requesting to be driven to the edge of the city and back, returning after midnight. They once caught a glimpse of them standing unusually close near the garden gate. But within the hierarchy of wealthy Indian households, no one dared interfere, especially not with the lady of the house. What no one realized, however, was that Rajeev had already begun to suspect something. While Meera moved deeper into her fantasy, Rajeev had started paying more attention not to his wife, but to the sudden changes in her schedule, her spending, and her silences. And in that silence, something dangerous was beginning to build, something that would soon shatter the illusion of control Meera thought she had. Rajeev Khurana had built his empire on instinct, the ability to sense shifts in tone, energy, and intention. He noticed things others overlooked. In business, this gave him the upper hand. At home, it made him dangerously perceptive. For weeks, he had watched Meera's behavior evolve from subtle to suspicious. Her mood swings, sudden outings, and evasive answers didn't go unnoticed. She was spending more time outside the home, returning late, and making excuses that didn't match the security logs. She laughed more, but not with him. He recognized that glow on her face. It wasn't joy, it was infatuation. Rather than confront her, Rajeev took the calculated route. He quietly hired a private investigator from Mumbai with a reputation for discretion. The instructions were simple: follow her, gather proof, and say nothing to anyone. Within days, the investigator delivered the first batch of photographs, grainy yet damning. Meera and Armaan, sitting close in the back seat of the SUV. Her hand resting briefly on his. Stolen moments at roadside cafes, sunglasses disguising her identity, but the smile giving her away. It wasn't just an affair. It was emotional, possibly even obsessive. What shocked Rajeev most wasn't the betrayal, it was the scale of it. The investigator uncovered that Meera had transferred over 4 lakhs to a separate bank account, linked to Armaan under a false name. Jewelry was missing from the locker, likely pawned or gifted. Rajeev felt a wave of disbelief. His wife, a woman who once hesitated to tip staff generously, was now funding a teenage driver's lifestyle. She wasn't just cheating, she was investing in a fantasy. Instead of reacting emotionally, Rajeev began preparing. He met with his lawyers to update his will, began freezing joint accounts, and initiated steps to secure his business interests. He made it look like standard financial restructuring, ensuring Meera remained unaware. Meanwhile, within their social circle, rumors had already started to circulate. A minor gossip blog focused on the elite class published a vague but sharp post hinting at a scandal brewing in Pune's high society. It described an unnamed real estate heiress entangled in an inappropriate relationship with her household staff. Though names weren't revealed, the clues were clear to those who knew them. The news spread like wildfire behind closed doors, hushed conversations in clubs, cryptic remarks at brunches, silent judgment behind manicured smiles. Meera, increasingly paranoid, sensed the shift, Invitations dwindled, old friends stopped calling, and whispers followed her wherever she went. The illusion of secrecy began to crumble. In desperation, she confronted Armaan, urging him to leave with her. She promised a new life, perhaps in Goa, where no one knew them. He could study, she would invest in a business, and they'd start fresh. But Armaan wasn't prepared for such a leap. He was still a teenager, overwhelmed by the attention and terrified of the consequences. He hesitated, unsure if he could trust the dream she was selling. That hesitation marked the beginning of the end. What had once been a secret, thrilling escape from a quiet life was now spiraling into something far more dangerous. And none of them, not Meera, not Rajeev, not Armaan, would make it through unscathed. It was a suffocatingly humid night in early July when the calm in Pune shattered. Armaan Sheikh, just 19 years old, was found dead in his one-room rental flat on the outskirts of the city. He had been strangled with a leather belt. The room was dimly lit, the fan still spinning, and a half-empty bottle of water sat untouched on the floor. There were signs of a struggle, a broken picture frame, a chair knocked over, and fingernail scratches on his neck. No valuables were taken. His wallet lay undisturbed, and his modest belongings remained untouched. At first glance, it didn't look like a robbery. It looked personal. The landlord who lived downstairs noticed the foul smell after 2 days and called the police. Once inside, investigators quickly ruled out theft and began treating the case as a homicide. It didn't take long for Meera's name to surface. A neighbor had seen her SUV parked outside the building late at night, just hours before Armaan was believed to have died. The CCTV at the entrance had captured her car's number plate. She was one of the last people to see him alive. When police arrived at the Khurana residence for questioning, Meera appeared visibly shaken. She claimed she hadn't seen Armaan in days and was unaware of his death, but her voice trembled, and her timeline didn't align with the footage. Investigators began digging deeper. They accessed Armaan's mobile records and discovered a string of voice notes, call logs, and text messages exchanged between the two, some affectionate, others desperate. One particular message from Meera, sent just 2 nights before his death, read, "We don't have much time. Please trust me." Rajeev's involvement came into question when forensics revealed that the belt used in the murder bore the initials R.K., a limited edition piece Rajeev had custom-made on a trip to Europe. It was part of a gift set he'd received years ago. That detail shifted the case from a simple love affair gone wrong to something more layered and sinister. When investigators obtained a warrant to access the Khurana residence's security footage, they discovered that several files from the night of Armaan's death had been deleted. Suspicious, the cybercrime unit was brought in. Through data recovery software, they retrieved fragments of a video recorded in the garage hours before the murder. In the clip, Meera and Rajeev could be seen having a heated exchange. Meera appeared agitated. Rajeev looked composed but stern. While there was no audio, their body language told a story of confrontation, not reconciliation. Later, evidence surfaced that Meera had driven to Armaan's flat to meet him that night, possibly to convince him to run away with her one last time. But Rajeev had followed her. Whether it was premeditated or a crime of passion remained unclear, but the outcome was final. Armaan never made it out of that room. In the days following the murder, the media frenzy escalated. News channels splashed Meera's photo alongside headlines filled with scandal and shame. Reporters camped outside the Khurana estate. The story of a wealthy housewife, a teenage driver, and a murder born from betrayal gripped the nation. But the most chilling part was still to come, the truth behind what really happened that night. The investigation into Armaan Sheikh's death had gripped both the media and the public, but what unfolded in the weeks that followed sent deeper shockwaves through the city's elite circles. With mounting pressure, investigators pieced together the final moments leading up to the murder, gradually unraveling the truth that had been hidden behind high walls and carefully constructed lies. Forensic experts had already confirmed that the belt used in the strangulation bore fibers from both Rajeev's wardrobe and Meera's personal scarf, likely transferred during their encounter in the garage. DNA evidence placed Meera at Armaan's flat that night, despite her initial denial. More incriminating still, a small droplet of Rajeev's blood was found under Armaan's fingernails, suggesting a struggle between the two men. The investigation turned from circumstantial suspicion to airtight prosecution. Under interrogation, Meera eventually broke down. She confessed to driving to Armaan's room late that night after their plans to leave the city had collapsed. Armaan, overwhelmed and fearful, had tried to distance himself. The dream Meera had constructed was falling apart. She had pleaded with him, begged him not to abandon her. She hadn't realized that Rajeev, who had been quietly tracking her for days, had followed her that night in a second car. According to Meera's statement, Rajeev confronted them inside the small flat. The argument escalated. Armaan tried to defend himself, and in the heat of the moment, Rajeev used his belt to strangle the boy. Meera claimed she froze in shock, unable to stop what was happening. Whether out of fear, denial, or loyalty, she helped wipe down surfaces afterward and removed Armaan's phone, which was never recovered. She returned home in silence, where the couple agreed never to speak of it again. But the weight of that silence was unbearable. Meera's behavior grew erratic in the days that followed. She hardly ate, spent hours locked in her room, and was spotted praying at a nearby temple, something she hadn't done in years. Meanwhile, Rajeev tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. He attended business meetings, even hosted a small dinner party the night before the police issued the formal arrest warrant. When the arrests finally happened, the public was shocked. Meera was charged as an accessory to murder and for obstruction of justice. Rajeev was charged with murder, destruction of evidence, and criminal conspiracy. Their once-idolized family name was reduced to tabloid fodder overnight. Protests erupted outside the courthouse, with activists demanding justice for Armaan, a poor village boy whose life was erased by the powerful. The Khurana business empire crumbled under the weight of the scandal. Investors pulled out, properties were frozen, friends and allies vanished. The villa that once symbolized wealth and status was now guarded by police tape and court orders. In the end, 3 lives were ruined, 1 lost forever, and 2 imprisoned by their own secrets. What began as a quiet, forbidden affair in the shadows ended in a brutal killing, a shattered family, and a city left haunted by the truth that no amount of money or privilege could bury forever.